Thank you very much.
All right, so this is kind of a trial run through for this evening. This will be kind of a director's cut version of it. It'll have to be much shorter this evening. So we'll just run through it. We're gonna show you both the school's budget and the city budget in the context of the fall referenda that are on the ballots. Maybe some of you have already voted on them. My son was filling out his ballot the other night. We will just publish this morning the information on the city budget. So that's now available for free on our website. So you can go check that out.
We will send that out to both committees. We'll send the actual budget brief out to both government relations and economic development the minute we get it.
Very good. All right, so we can just start going through stuff. The forum is a membership organization that local governments, companies, and nonprofits in the area all are members. We encourage you to join or think about joining as an individual or organization if you haven't. So here's just a look at the event tonight. We've already talked about that. Go ahead. And thank you, by the way, to Reinhardt, who is like, this is our day to be hosted by and sponsored by Reinhardt. So we could say you're starting the day with me, but it's also, you're starting and ending the day with Reinhardt.
Thank you very much, Reinhardt.
So thank you for that. And you can go through these, but it's just some of the,
thank you, everybody.
The top supporters of the forum. Okay, so many people are probably asking themselves as they're looking at their ballot, why do we have all of these referenda coming at us at once? And obviously the school districts and cities have their own different factors. It's important to note that in addition to Madison, Fitchburg, Monona, Middleton, and the village of Maple Bluff all have referenda on the ballot this fall, and there's a number of school districts that have referenda on the ballot. So different factors for schools and municipalities, but some common ones. One, the state has put tight limits on the property tax of both entities, both types of governments. Inflation, all y'all business people, you understand this, has gone up really rapidly in recent years. We did see an increase in turnover, particularly in 2022, 2023, for all employers, including government. That caused they didn't have to do it, but the city and school district made a decision to increase wages as a result of that faster than they did revenues. And faster than their property taxes could go up. And they got by with federal pandemic relief aid, but that aid is now coming to an end. And then the final factor that is really kind of different is for the school district, enrollment has been down and their revenues are limited by enrollment by the state. So that is leading them to try to go beyond the state limit with a referendum. The city, on the other hand, the population is up, and that also puts some additional stress on city services. They don't get really a population factor in their revenue limit from the state. So that rise in population adds a little extra pressure on the margin for them to do a referendum. Go ahead.
Are you taking questions during, or should we wait until that?
Yeah, absolutely, that's fine. Yeah.
Oh, so I was just back to bullet point number 1. Is that something new this year that all of a sudden they're tightening the belt on those limits, or is that something that has been progressing over the years? 2011
is when that really came into effect, and it just builds over time. Now, the school district has done referendum in the past. They did one in 2016, one in 2020, and now they have another one, operating referendum.
Right, yeah.
And then separately, we talk about their capital referendum. They also did one. They did one for the high schools in 2020. Now they're doing one for the middle schools, essentially. But it's for the city in particular that's doing it one for the first time. There is a building effect as your revenues are not growing as quickly as your costs. That just tells more over time. So that's why you're starting. And I think for the city, also, we had something called Act 12 over the summer of 2023 that provided quite a bit more state aid to many municipalities in 2024. On a per capita basis, did less for Madison than any of the other, let's see, how many are there, like 1,250 municipalities in the state. So getting through that, knowing, okay, now the state probably is not gonna do anything else. They did their big state aid bill. They wrote the formula in a way that was geared towards smaller communities. So now the city is going this route, you know. And again, it's not to say that the city didn't make decisions, because we talked about the wages are the big decision that they made. But you know, this is the route that they've gone. Okay, so we'll start out with the school district. This is the revenue limit, total funds available under it for the school district. The revenue limit is by state law limits school district revenues from the property tax and state general school aids on a per pupil basis. And so what you can see, we adjust it for inflation here. It peaked in 2021 with the November 2020 referendum. And then when inflation really kicks in, it starts to erode the buying power of what the school district can do. We can go on to the next. So that's looking at just total. This chart looks at it on a per pupil basis. Again, you can see how the effects of inflation have kicked in. The school district in Madison, still well above the state average, but you know, both the state average and for Madison, the effects of inflation have been pretty significant in recent years. Here's just looking at, this is just those same numbers parsed for you a little bit different way. We're comparing 20 years ago to 2004. That was a little bit of a high water mark that year because there was sort of a one-year referendum that year. But Madison is down, if you look back 20 years, MMSD's revenues, here's how they compare. The referendum, the operating referendum for Madison, when we talk about the revenue limit, that's really related to the operation, the operating budget of the schools. It would add $30 million in 2025 and $100 million by 2028. That's a big increase. That's a 24% increase over 4 years in the district's revenue limit. So this is something very significant. Here's a look at, well, how does our revenue limit in Madison compare to other school districts statewide? So here's the left panel is the largest 10 school districts in the state. The right panel is Madison and the surrounding 9 school districts in Dane County. And then the light blue bars are showing the effects of referenda that have happened in these various other districts in 2024 that are going to take effect for the 25 school year. And so you can, or, you know, subsequent school years. And, you know, many of these other school districts may do a referendum in future years, but we're just showing you what we know right now. So you can see Madison's like 15,500 per student and would add like 3,800. So would put them above $19,000 per student. State average currently 13,000. So it gives you a sense of where we fall among large districts and our neighbors. We can go on to the next slide here. So second highest among large districts, third highest in Dane County. When you think about statewide districts, the needs of students in Madison are very comparable. I mean, you have districts that have lower needs, but then you have districts like MPS, Milwaukee Public Schools, where they have much greater needs among their students and costs to educate them. In Dane County, though, the Madison schools, their students here in town do tend to have greater needs than the suburban districts, which translates to higher costs for the district. That would include more low-income students, more students who don't speak English as a first language, and more students with disabilities. And those are, you know, some of the things that you have to sort of think about, as well as cost of living, as you think about what is enough, how should you think about Madison's funding compared to other districts. Okay, the school district started out the summer with about a $40 million budget shortfall for this current 2025 school year. And these are some of the factors that added to it. The shortfall then went up a little bit because the district also did an additional wage increase. A big factor was in the previous school year, 2024, there was a 10% wage increase. 8% for base wages and 2% for education and experience, what are so-called the steps and lanes. That was not sustainably funded. They dipped into, they did that raise knowing that they didn't have the ongoing revenues to pay for it, and they pulled that money out of their reserves. If the referendum were to fail, they would do that again in a very big way this year. If the referendum succeeds, they'll do it, but to a smaller degree.
What's the rationale for a wage increase without a sustainable path to pay for it?
What they would say is, in their negotiations with the union, under state law, the union is allowed to negotiate for base wages up to CPI, the consumer price index, or the rate of inflation. For that year, it was 8%. And the union held out for 8%. The district chose to do that. The argument for doing it would be that they had significant turnover, and that your biggest component of if education is successful really is your teachers, and that they wanted to hold on to experienced people. Their argument for not doing it was they didn't have the money to pay for it. And if the referendum fails, they won't have the money to pay for it. So that's the trade-off that the school board considered, and they went with doing the wage increase. Yeah, go
Can
ahead.
you go back to the student slide real quick, the slide just prior to this? Just curious, those student comparisons, the last two bullets, is that percentage of students or is that absolute head count?
Percentage of students. Yes, exactly.
And then the first bullet point on this slide, the replacing stimulus funding.
Yes.
So before the stimulus funding, how are those 111 positions being funded?
There are a variety of positions, but some of them were new creations. So they created some new, so
Last 3 years.
one of the ways where both the city and the school district have gotten by since the pandemic is they've received, particularly the school district, a considerable influx, well, really both the city and the schools have a considerable influx of federal pandemic relief funds, particularly from the American Rescue Plan Act. Those funds have now expired, so they've got to be at least obligated at this point for a particular new events purpose, and they're no longer available to provide budget relief. Now, they did, with those funds, they did some things that were, for example, the city did things for addressing the homeless population that were one-time things. The school district also did things with that money, like replacing their HVAC systems in some of their aging buildings that were one-time uses of this temporary funds. And so that works from a budget standpoint. You do that one-time spending, the money goes away, everything's good. In some ways, you may be better off because the district doing those HVAC projects, I mean, it doesn't help with learning loss, it doesn't directly help the students, but it does help the district address a cost that they're gonna have to address it. At some point, they do it with that one-time money. But they also did some things with that money that were ongoing. One of the big one was the creation of these 111 positions. And in 2025, in the current budget, they had to find money either spent through spending cuts in other areas or using new revenues to address that. And again, the reality was there wasn't enough money to do all those things that they wanted to do. So that's part of your $40 million.
Those are newer positions. Okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Some of, if a lot of people left during the pandemic and then came in, I think we all experienced, when you were hiring on new people, it's just at a higher
Right,
wage.
correct,
It's
correct.
just, that just happens. You know, in the mayor's budget presentation, she talks about the fact that they've just done with less for so long.
Yep.
That they've reached a breaking point in their
Right.
staffing, like they
Right.
can't do it anymore. And, you know, okay, that,
Right.
you know, you can see the
Right.
population growing and that's the fact, but here, my understanding is like the school population is actually declining, so what's the justification for, and are these
Additional
all new
positions.
positions?
There were positions that were created during the pandemic. The schools and the city, and I alluded to this in that first slide, are on a little different footing in that the school enrollment in Madison is down, not like it is, say, in some big urban districts like Milwaukee, where their enrollment is down like maybe 30% over the past 20 years, like to a huge degree. But enrollment is down for the Madison Public Schools. Their position count is relatively strong, so their ratio in terms of staff to students, pretty strong. For the city, the population has grown and the staff to resident ratios have been going down. You know, Tyler, who did an excellent job working with me on the city budget brief, you know, pointed out that, and maybe you could talk for just a second about the new positions for the city in the area of garbage collection. But that's like the most, you know, pedestrian thing we could talk about.
But yeah, so, you know.
Yeah, you want it gone, right? When you're done with it, you want it
Yeah,
gone.
I just wrote a bunch about the garbage collection in Eau Claire, and if you don't take it away, people get real mad.
Yeah.
But so, two of the positions that the city added were garbage collectors. I think they hadn't added any new garbage sort of focused positions in 4 or 5 years, where they've been getting 800 or so new customers each year. And so you've been having the same number of people do more work each year. And, you know, there's efficiencies you can get. The new, you know, one-arm trucks are great, but at a certain point you need more people to service more customers. And so, you know, that's one of the reasons that the city is sort of increasing positions. These school district positions, from what I, you know, understand, some of them were created in part to help students deal with, you know, learning loss during the pandemic. You know, my high school kids, you know, they lost a year. They needed someone to help navigate getting those credits back. And so that's some of these positions. And, you know, I think initially they thought maybe they would go away when the pandemic funds ran out, but I think.
And some positions did go away. Some positions they created and they did go away. I mean, there are student mental health issues that have come up since the pandemic. So there's arguments they're making for, I mean, I think certainly if you look at the schools, the need of the students, individual students, is greater today. I don't think anybody would dispute that it was in 2019 because of school closures and everything else that people went through during the pandemic. At the same time, there are fewer students in the district, and when you look at the projections, you would expect that to continue from where we're, at least for, you know, when we're talking about 15 years from now, it's very hard to predict the future. But if we're talking about 5 years from now, I think that's pretty solid.
Are the lower enrollments due to higher enrollments in the peripheral school districts?
I mean, there's a couple factors. One is just the birth rates are down across Wisconsin. So this is not something that is unique to Madison. This is across the state. And in some ways, again, Madison's in a better position than some big urban districts nationally. But there is also some competition. In particular, you know, there are now charter schools that can be authorized by the UW system. And there are voucher schools. And those, in Madison, those competing alternatives for students didn't exist 20 years ago. And they, you know, they have over time expanded the number of students they serve. So that's another factor. Oh, and then the last factor is open enrollment. So there are students that open enroll into the Madison district from suburban districts, and there are students from Madison that open enroll out. But there's the net flow is out.
People wanna be out of a Madison school.
More than want to be in.
Does that speak to like product quality? Like educational outcomes?
I have never done a deep dive into that, like what are the factors driving that? But certainly, if the district over time could improve those numbers, that would be helpful to them from a financial standpoint. And it would probably also suggest that there would be, you'd probably need to have some things that the community liked to have that happen.
Question from John Tucker.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, is the current cost slash student outpacing inflation or previous averages?
In recent years, the per pupil funding for the Madison schools have lagged inflation. And that's why if you go to that, if you think back to that first slide and you saw the slope of that line was going down for the past several years, that's why it's going down. Is because inflation is eroding the buying power of what they have.
Can I ask one, on the staffing, is the effect of the city, that makes perfect sense, right? And that's been a compounding effect over time.
Yeah.
Was the school district maybe finding that same effect pre-pandemic? And so, these 110 positions, I guess my question is, were they already strained?
Mhm.
And even though the population is declining, these extra burdens post-pandemic of mental health and catching people up and
Yeah.
all of those things have put kind of a similar strain on this. Is that part of the explanation?
It's part of it. Also, we just lost kids out of the public school system during COVID.
Yeah.
And that again was true across the state. It was more true in urban areas. It was the most true in urban areas. And some of those kids have come back, but some of them have not. But then just the other factor is, again, if you look at it, the classes of 12th graders in general statewide and in general for Madison, the 12th grade class is bigger than the 8th grade class, which is bigger than the 4-year-old kindergarten. It's just because fewer kids are being born. So Madison does pretty well in terms of attracting like net migration. So that's positive. But a lot of our net migration has been, the younger professionals that maybe, sort of the epic class 10 years from now will be something they will be doing is sending kids into the school system, but not yet. And then, me.
Does the referenda and these numbers factor in I know what you call the 400-year veto funding bill of the city?
Yeah, it does. I mean, that so the schools for 2 years were frozen in terms of their revenue limit. The legislature kept it just flat for 2 years. And the tail end of that is when inflation hit 8%. So those two things came really, traditionally the revenue limit and inflation for schools moved more or less together. And during the pandemic, those two came up completely apart in a way more than they ever had been before. And the 325, what the legislature did and what the governor did in terms of that veto you're referring to was to increase by, I think, $325 per pupil, the revenue limit per year. That kind of now is keeping it up with inflation. So it's back toward that as inflation has come down, but it hasn't caught us up from just that period where the revenue limit 0, inflation 8%. Okay, so next. Oh, and one other factor we didn't mention was health. I mean, there are just healthcare costs, pension costs, other things that go up, and so those add to the spending for the school district. We'll see how we're doing. Yeah, we're doing okay. So everything, right? Exactly. We're doing that Q&A now. So everything that we talked about up till now is the $100 million operating referendum for the schools. But there's also a $570 million capital referendum. It's 10 schools. Some of them are shared elementary, middle schools that are one, complex, if you will. Here's a look at these 10 schools. This chart is kind of busy, so I'll break it down for you here. The letter, bless you, is the condition rating of these facilities. Okay, most of the Madison School District schools were built before 1960, so they're old. And some of them are not in great condition. Some of the mechanicals, the HVAC and so on, not in good condition. So I don't think anyone disputes that a lot of these schools are gonna need work one way or another. And if you don't do a big renovation, you're gonna end up on the nickel and diming for maintenance. You're gonna pay one way or another. Where you do have an issue that I think has not been part of the public debate and is worth discussing is the capacity issues within the schools. So as we've talked about, enrollment is down. The district has not had a discussion, and the public would have to weigh in about whether the public would even want this, but the district has not had really a discussion with the community about, do we want to keep all these schools open? It's worth noting that our middle schools, we're talking about rebuilding middle schools, either from scratch or a big renovation. The upper bound cost of that can get up for a single middle school, elementary school complex up near $100 million. So just doing one of these things, it's a significant cost. And some of these schools are below 60% utilization. In fact, all the middle schools are that we're looking, except Cherokee, that we're looking at renovating are below 60%. So, one discussion that could be had and could still be had, even if the referendum passes, is, does the community feel like, well, we're a growing community, we think we're gonna need these schools at some point in the future, we're just gonna bite the bullet, we're just gonna pay to renovate every single one of them? Or do you think about, as some other districts statewide are doing right now, do we have a discussion about the footprint of the district? The policy forum, we don't take a position on any of these issues. We're just trying to foster a more informed debate. So again, this is kind of a complicated chart. Any questions from all of you all about this one? Okay, that debt, by the way, oh no, go ahead, you can go ahead. We'd be paying that off over the next 23 years. That $507 million. Okay, so here is a look at the effect of the referendum on your school property taxes. What we learned over the summer is that if both the referendums passed, they would add about $1,376 a year to what your property taxes would otherwise be for the schools. However, we just got an audible thrown at us on Tuesday when the state put out state aid numbers. And that the Madison schools got a huge windfall in those numbers. They were about $10 million higher state general school aid payment for this year than we expected it to be. So that was, and we could talk about why, but that's probably a rabbit hole that we don't want to go down. Let's just stipulate that the number is going to go up, and because of the way the formula works, it is going to remain elevated for some years to come. So that was kind of winning the lottery as a community a little bit on that one. I still am going back and forth with the district on this. I don't think it changes the blue bars on this chart much at all. However, what it does change is the gray bars. Okay, does that make sense? So in other words, it sort of changes our baseline. So what we expected was the operating referendum to add about $320 to what property taxes would otherwise be in 2025. This is a little bit complicated. I still think that will be the case. However, I do think now that just the baseline is gonna go way down. And so that $300 means that your bill on the typical home in the city would only rise about $40. So no, if the referendum fails, you'd expect the bill to go down by like $280 or something like that. And if the referendum succeeds, the bill goes up by like $40. So there's still a $320 difference. It's just, it goes down a little bit easier maybe for some people. And people also understand that if the referendum doesn't pass, the district's gonna have to actually cut property taxes. Because the revenue limit's gonna stay the same. General school aids are gonna go up, so that forces the district to cut the property tax. Okay, so that was the most complicated thing you have to understand. So, and I actually saw you all nodding, so like. Good
I nod when I don't
It's
understand. Yeah, okay. Sure,
It's a smart idea. It's a smart idea. Okay, so here we were talking about how the revenue limit, we were talking earlier about the revenue limit coming unglued from inflation. Here's the city property tax doing the same thing. The city's property tax is limited for operations, can only go up by the rate of net new construction a year. Again, that in Madison, it grows, that's the light blue line. It's in recent years grown between 1.75 and 2.6% a year, which is pretty good, better than the state average. But again, inflation hit 8%. It's down to maybe, I don't know, what will it be? Maybe 3% this year, maybe 4% in 21 and 23. So again, those two things came way out of whack. And it has had this ongoing effect on the city budget. And the referendum would help to catch the city up with that. You can go ahead to the next slide. Okay, the city faces a $22 million shortfall for the 2025 budget. And this chart, it's a little bit busy, but it explains to you how you get to that $22 million. The gray bars are just new revenues. A lot of that is the property tax and state aid, things like that, additional money that the city is getting. And then the city has so it has about $24 million in new revenues, about $46 million in new costs, and that gives you the $22 million gap. Some of the new costs are just to replace one-time money that the city used in the past. So we talked about the ARPA money that the school district used. The city did the same thing. There was like $5.5 million in the current 2024 budget that's going away. They gotta replace that money somehow with spending cuts or new revenues. The city has done pay increases. So what did they do this year? We did 3% pay increase this year, plus a 1% for sort of experience. I think, was it last year, was it 6%?
Yeah.
Or at least for the general
For the general
employees.
employees, yeah.
For the general employees, they did 6%. Now, they've done that knowing that, again, the property tax this whole time has been going up by like 2%. The property tax is like 70% of the revenue for Madison. So if wages are growing, and wages are like 70% of the costs or something like that. So if your costs are going up by 6%, your revenue is going up by 2%. Long term, that doesn't work. The city again made a decision that they felt that the thing that they were going to do was increase wages, and here we are. Now we're in the situation that we're in. Again, it's not to second guess the decision that they made. It's just to explain this is how we got here. Any questions about this chart? Again, since it's kind of a busy one. Cool. So the mayor has put forward 2 proposals to close this budget gap.
I actually do have a question.
Okay,
Can you go
cool.
back to the last
Yeah, no
slide?
problem.
The replacing one-time revenues.
Yes.
So if part of those were funded from federal dollars that are now no longer.
Yep.
Why would we need to replace them if they were one-time costs and they were already funded by federal dollars?
So if we had used the money, well, okay, so any money that we used for one-time costs as a city, we would not need to replace, and it's not on this chart.
Oh, okay,
So there's additional things in 2024
that are other
that the
one-time
city's
costs,
doing,
okay.
such as one-time things for the homeless. I'm trying to think of, so what would be some other examples?
So there's quite a bit of money for, homeless in terms of both sort of direct services, some, public health related expenditures,
Yes,
capital improvements to buildings and stuff.
yes.
I think there was, a little bit of investment in the transit system, sort of capital improvements or one-time services for, either, again, like we were talking about before, needs directly created by the pandemic or things that, they're considering investing in anyway and then decided to, go ahead and use this windfall.
Right.
But then there is this money that was just sort of used in the operating budget to plug holes for lost revenue.
Right, and for one thing, they put some money in a fund for funding homeless things in the future. And so that money, they're just kind of using the interest that is coming out of that fund. So things like that are sustainable, not on the chart.
Got it.
Okay, so the $22 million shortfall, the mayor has two ways of closing it. The first is the referendum. If it passes, then it would just be a $22 million increase in property tax over the increase that is currently allowed under state law. And that would be your budget. It would solve it in the short term. The city would still have a long-term problem of revenues growing more slowly than costs. So, if you look out to 2028, the city will still have to find other solutions to the problem long-term, but for 2025, it would solve it. In scenario 2, if the referendum fails, the mayor has proposed doing three things. One, doing some budget cuts. What these really are limiting spending increases. So the spending would go up by $5 million less than it otherwise would go up. So budget cuts is a little bit of a misnomer there. But it will result in real service cuts in areas where, libraries and places like that aren't getting enough to keep their cost to continue. So, that there are real impacts. I don't want to say they're what they're not, they're real world impacts to that. The city would take funds out of their fund balance. They would essentially draw money out of their reserves. And then the city would put in place a $10 million special infrastructure charge. And we don't want to get too bogged down in that, but Tyler, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
So the idea with the special infrastructure charge is that the city would levy a charge on every property in the city related to the amount of traffic generated by that property, and the charges to recover costs related to transportation infrastructure. Now, that sounds relatively similar. I think most of y'all have heard of some of these transportation utility fees. Relatively similar process imposed under different part of statutes. Jason always makes me promise not to give legal advice since I'm not an attorney. I guess the upshot of the special infrastructure charge is it's planned for 10 million. It's related to properties and the traffic they generate, and it may face some sort of legal question in front of a judge at some point. The outcome of that I cannot opine on, but there may be hurdles.
Yeah. The city says up and down that this is under a different part of the statute, and they believe that it could withstand any court challenge, unlike the transportation utility fees, which the Supreme Court essentially struck down. We'll see. To our knowledge, there's no other city in the state that has imposed this kind of a charge under this section of the statutes.
Yeah,
So we can't tell you what's going to happen with that if we go down that road. Now, if the referendum passes, it's an academic thing for now, although it could come back in the future. But for now, that's what we can tell you about that.
Yeah, one other little note, the city does have, somebody may even pay this, the mall special charge, and that one was the court challenge. There's also the special forestry charge. So again, we're not sure.
The city is saying that they have, that they've imposed charges in other cases and that they've held up. Again, this may work the same way or it may not. We will have to see.
And they talked about how that would be measured. I mean, presumably, from like a selfish standpoint, if it's related to transportation infrastructure, hotels are gonna get hit, commercial properties.
Commercial projects, commercial properties
multi,
are gonna have a bigger impact from this.
yeah, for
There's-
sure.
And, we have not, it's not been drafted. And it wouldn't be drafted unless the referendum fails. So in terms of saying but there would be a process for estimating trips generated. And there would be an assessment based on that, is my understanding. Yeah, Nathan.
Is that a property tax assessment or is it applicable to like hospitals and nonprofits?
I believe that would it go on the municipal services bill or would it go on the property tax?
So again, I think that would depend on how exactly it was drafted. The idea is that it will apply to nonprofit properties, university properties. So it's a charge to all.
Yeah, would
properties.
apply to,
Across the board.
to tax exempt properties. The urban forestry charge appears on your water bill. I'd have to get back to you. It's a good question. Leave it to Nathan to ask a question.
Do these scenarios take into consideration this $10 million lottery that the city of Madison has just won?
No, because that will only benefit the school's budget.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I misunderstood.
Exactly.
I think we should note too, in scenario 2, there are certainly several ramifications, direct ramifications to downtown, 2 large ones in particular, but certainly any loss of service in libraries and other
Yes.
city services will absolutely affect the downtown, no question. But there are 2 that we are identifying, and Peggy is on right now, the chair of the bid, that are problematic, and certainly is a word that could be used. The first would be a loss of $62,500 that the city pays for generally summer programming in the downtown area to bring people downtown. That would be lost. And then the second is actually referring to this mall maintenance.
Yeah.
So the city of Madison, there's something called a mall maintenance fee that the property owners of the business improvement district pay half of, and the city of Madison pays half. If it is now in the budget, that if the referendum fails, that proportion would go from 50-50 to 75 for property owners, 25% paid by the city of Madison. That results in about a $420,000 difference. It's actually one of the largest changed items in the referendum by dollar amount. And so for a long time, Susan, this ran 25-75 the other direction. So this mayor did change it. Emily, who was the chair of the bid at the time, it changed from 25 property, 75 city to 50-50 city. Emily, that was probably what, 2020?
It was prior,
Ish.
it was prior to the pandemic.
So 2019?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that would be just not editorializing here, I'm just saying that those are 2 major changes to the downtown, direct changes.
Thank you.
And additionally, of course, you have the indirect changes, libraries and pools and things like that, that too affect the downtown as well.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is those changes would happen if the referendum doesn't pass. But these additional fees would still come in, so it's not like, or with the fees that offset.
So in 25, none of the stuff in scenario 2 happens if the referendum passes.
Right.
Now, in future
Well,
years,
Potentially, I mean, you still have to get through the budget debate of 2025 and there's still a lot of trading that happens.
under the mayor's proposal.
Right.
And could some of these things, now, you still have that long-term imbalance in spending and revenue, so could you see some of these things come back in 2027? Yes, but but at least for the mayor would not see those things in 25. Okay. Now, the council will also.
Changes can happen.
Yeah,
Of
it's
course, of course.
A lot of changes happen in early November.
Okay, keep moving to the next slide.
Can I add something quickly to about
Yeah.
mall maintenance, if people aren't familiar? It really is, a huge impact on the beautification of downtown, and so it's all of the planters downtown, it's snow removal on the sidewalks for State Street and the Capitol Square, it's removal of gum. We talked about that a lot back
A
in the
lot.
day. Cleaning of the streets, there's a lot that goes into it that, benefits what we experience when we're
Thank you,
downtown.
Emily, very much for explaining more about that
Yeah.
moment. I'm sorry, I just sort of-
Yeah.
I'm in this downtown world where
It's not
everyone
everybody really
understands.
knows.
There's a really good question from Peggy Gunderson in the chat too, who I should mention is we're very proud that is our TMI representative to the bid board and is the bid current chair of the board of directors. Question, is there a limit of increase for property owners in a municipality? The bid property owners will face an increased bid assessment. It's actually never been raised in 25 years. And if this referendum fails, another increase in mall maintenance, is there a cap of a total increase?
I mean, the cap on the mall maintenance would be 100%.
Right.
Like that would be the cap for that. Now, I suppose after that, you couldn't go beyond what the actual charges were. I suppose the city could try to move some additional charges into that, into what's covered by that special charge, but I mean, that would be, in terms of the bid, I'm not sure I can speak to that.
Yeah,
Like,
and currently, we do know, in fact, we know this, Peggy knows this already, but to the larger group. Mall maintenance as a parks department, is run by the parks department. They actually do other parts of other parks for the downtown that is not part of the mall maintenance fee, but they do get additional staff because of the mall maintenance fee, right? So there's a clear differentiation, Eric, that they show us the budget, it is clear differentiation. But they're also servicing the Birmingham Dog Park and things like that as part of it, separate pay, but you get more employees, and so it becomes scale, I guess.
Yeah. But the charges, there are under state law, they've got to relate those charges back to like actual spending, so.
Right.
That's very clear.
Okay, so here's property taxes increase, so if the referendum fails, property taxes, the levy overall will go up by 3.4%. If the referendum succeeds, it will go up by 11%. Obviously, that would be the biggest increase in, a generation at least in the data that we have for the city portion of your property tax levy in that.
I should note there is something in the chat for the larger group. One of our strong, great members of Government Relations Committee, Eve Galanter, hosts on City Channel, great conversations with local officials. She just recorded one with Dave Schmedeke, the city's controller, on the referendum, so it'll begin airing soon. We'll get that out to you all.
And Tyler when Tyler and Dave Schmidtke were both in the state budget office, they worked together.
Oh, there we go.
He was my boss. I took over the position that he started in, so I'm part of that lineage.
I didn't realize that.
It's like a coaching tree.
Oh, man, it's a full circle. I mentioned these other municipalities that are holding referenda also in November. Here's a look at the percentage increase above, so there's a state limit on local property taxes. Here's how much each of these referenda would increase their levy above the state limit. So Madison's about 7.5%, Monona 30%, so again, but I will also, so Madison less than those other communities, but also worth noting, there are some communities that are not going to referendum at all, and they're not on this chart, so.
I would say, to be fair, we are hearing rumors that other communities might be going to referendum in future years.
That's true.
Or have in the recent past.
Yes.
And yeah, I mean, because one thing about Dane County communities are that most Dane County communities have the same issue with Act 12, the state aid bill, as Madison did, that they didn't get a lot out of it. And so that's why they're gonna be, communities with high property values around the state, and that's most communities in Dane County, didn't get a lot out of that bill, especially if they were large population. And so, your Middletons, your Madisons, your Walatoses, your Waukeshaws, you're gonna see a lot of those communities looking to do something to make up for the fact that that bill was not particularly helpful. Here's just a look at spending in Madison compared to the city of Madison spending per capita compared to other large cities in the left and compared to, and we can send around this slide deck if people want these images. And I can send it to you.
Yeah, right.
And then on the right is other Dane County communities. So again, Madison, higher than average spending, so, and lower than average state aid, which that gives you higher than average property taxes. Here's what would happen if the city referendum passes or fails. For the average home valued at $457,000, taxes would rise by $313 or a little over 10% if the referendum succeeds. If it fails, it would rise by $83 or 2.8%. And again, if the city and MMSD property taxes go up, or if all those three referendum passes, taxes on the average home would be $547 more than they otherwise would be in December, and more at 4 years from now, about $1,600 more. Now, remember what I said earlier, though, that that's above where they otherwise would be. And for the school district, at least, taxes are on a path right now to go down if the referendum doesn't pass. So, it's not higher than they actually were under bill. Maybe that number would be lower than $547. It might be, something like $250, $275 more than like your current bill, something like that. For the city, again, just for the city and the schools. Dane County, we haven't talked about, we won't have time to talk about, the technical college district, no time to talk about that, but just for the city and schools. And that should wrap us up, I think.
Excellent. So we are
We kind of almost.
literally at time.
Exactly.
So I just want to say an enormous thank you to Wisconsin Policy Forum. What you're doing to educate our community on these vitally important local issues is, we cannot thank you enough. And we are so proud to be partners with you at Downtown Madison Inc. for years. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Please join us tonight if you can, 6 to 7:30. Thanks to our friends at Reinhardt as well for their partnership. We'll be there at the Edgewater Hotel. And if you can't join us there, a week from today as well, the 24th, Superintendent Joe Goffett with a much larger discussion about MMSD will be with us as well. And one of the bonuses is Amy Supple will be emceeing that night. And so you won't see me. You won't see me. I'll be in Green Bay trying to get us more direct flights. Amy.
I was gonna suggest, for those of you who think the work that Wisconsin Policy Forum does is important, and I think it's really important for the city, you can support them.
Yes.
So go to their website and support them, because it's, thank you, it's every time I talk
Smarter today.
with you and just with you, Tyler, but it's so clear, well presented, you don't take sides, I really, really appreciate it.
And the Edgewater is a member, and we really appreciate your support of Reinhardt and other, organizations.
So are we.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, thanks for the partnership. So we'll see you tonight, and thank you again for this. We really appreciate all your support. We'll see you soon. Thank you very much. Have a good day.